Campbell's Soup is one of America's most iconic brands. For over 150 years, they've been the comforting red and white can your mom grabbed when you're sick, the secret behind every Thanksgiving green bean casserole, and even the inspiration for Andy Warhol's most famous artwork. But behind that wholesome image is a company that admitted to dumping thousands of pollutants into an Ohio river.
Campbell Soup is admitting to thousands of Clean Water Act violations at its Napoleon plant. Court filings show the company illegally dumped pollutants like phosphorus and E. coli into the Maumee River more than 5,400 times since 2018.
They got caught putting heavy metals in baby food and once fought an 8-year war against its own farm workers who are literally begging for toilets and minimum wage. But that's not even the worst of it, because the deeper you dig into Campbell's history, the more you realize this company has been misleading consumers for decades, slapping low sodium on cans that had just as much salt as the regular version, claiming their soup could prevent heart disease while loading it with sodium, and quietly lining their cans with a chemical linked to cancer for years after competitors had already stopped. What's even worse is that in 2025, a leaked internal phone call revealed something that would finally crack the entire company.
I don't this product's barely anymore. It's so healthy. Now that I know what the in it, even in a can of soup, I look at it, we can eat bioengineered meat. I don't want to eat a piece of chicken that came from a 3D printer, do you?
Today we're going to break down how America's most trusted soup company has been getting away with all of this for over a century and just how far they've fallen. But to understand how Campbell's became the kind of company that could survive scandal after scandal, we first need to understand how it earned America's trust in the first place. Because this story starts with a fruit merchant, an icebox maker, and a chemist. Joseph A. Campbell was a fruit merchant. His partner, Abraham Anderson, manufactured iceboxes. Together, in a cramped Camden workshop, they began canning tomatoes, vegetables, and preserves. They distributed them regionally across the eastern seaboard. At the time, the operation was modest, almost quaint. But in 1897, everything changed when the company hired a young chemist named Dr. John T. Dorrance, paying him just $7.50 a week. Dorrance, working with little more than bots and persistence, cracked the problem that had limited soup distribution for decades: water. He basically learned how to remove it from the cans so that they could be shipped cheaply and sold for a dime. At the time, they still focused on quality. The company even hired a French chef, Louis Delisle, to refine the broths. They also built research farms and hosted annual farmer meetings, teaching cultivation techniques to make sure their ingredients are top-notch. By 1904, the cherubic Campbell Kids mascots appeared in streetcar advertisements.
Have you had your soup today? Campbell's, of course. Campbell's, of course. Well, look. The Campbells are coming!
The brand won a gold medallion at the 1900 Paris Exposition, and in 1962, Andy Warhol immortalized those red and white cans in his famous pop art series.
I guess everybody paints the same picture over and over again anyway, so...
But empires built on trust have further to fall, and Campbell's was about to begin a long, slow descent. As Campbell's expanded nationwide, something began to change. Shelf life and cost efficiency started to matter more than the farm-fresh quality Dorrance had championed. The company discovered that certain ingredients could deliver intense flavor and long shelf life at a fraction of the cost of traditional recipes.
When the vegetables are in soup, he eats every last one. So I serve Campbell's vegetable soup often. This good soup has 15 good garden vegetables in a delicious...
In 1930, Campbell's was among the first major U.S. food companies to use monosodium glutamate in their canned soups. MSG intensified savory flavors without requiring expensive ingredients like chicken stock or aged beef. Between 1930 and 1941, the United States became one of the world's top MSG consumers, second only to Japan and Taiwan. But how did they preserve their food? Salt. They specifically used sodium. Campbell's soups grew saltier with each passing decade. Soon, a single serving could contain over 1,000 milligrams of sodium, nearly half the recommended daily intake. But further bottom line, salt was pure profit. Then there was what consumers couldn't see: the packaging itself. Those iconic red and white cans that Andy Warhol immortalized were lined with BPA, bisphenol A chemical used to prevent metal corrosion. BPA would later be found to increase hormonal disruption, increase cancer risk, and cause metabolic disorders. Competitors started pledging to go BPA free. Campbell's didn't do so immediately. They only planned to stop in 2016, years after their competitors did. Soon, a single can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup listed over 30 ingredients: potassium chloride, monosodium glutamate, disodium inosinate, disodium guanylate, hydrolyzed soy protein, high fructose corn syrup, and various unnamed flavoring agents. Ironic, because the brand had built its entire reputation as being home cooking.
It's good.
It's real good. It's home cooking soup, not hot enough.
If only Kimi had taste buds. I can happily say there's no artificial anything.
One of the most infamous deceptions in Campbell's history came in the late 1960s. To make their soups appear more bountiful in television commercials, the advertising agency BBDO came up with a clever trick. They placed clear glass marbles at the bottom of soup bowls. These marbles propped up the solid ingredients like vegetables, noodles, chunks of meat, forcing them to the surface and creating the illusion of a can overflowing with hearty content.
Your steaming bowl is filled with tender, stick-to-the-ribs vegetables, barley, and lean meat.
The reality was very different. Without the marbles, the ingredients naturally sank, leaving a bowl that looked far less impressive. The Federal Trade Commission charged Campbell's with deceptive advertising in 1969. Management's defense belongs in a hall of fame for corporate audacity. They claimed they were only breaking the law of gravity and not the law of the land. The FTC was not amused. The case ultimately led to the birth of corrective advertising, which was a new regulatory power allowing the FTC to force companies to run ads admitting to their previous deceptions. As the company fought regulators over what it was telling consumers, a different battle was quietly building out in the fields. People who picked the tomatoes, stirred the kettles, and packed the cans were starting to notice they'd been left behind. In 1978, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee approached Campbell Soup Company about the poor working conditions of farm workers who picked the brand's vegetables. The FLOC had found that these workers were living below the poverty level. They didn't have insurance, and they were given unreasonable housing by their employers. The workers weren't asking for much. They wanted minimum wage. They wanted plumbing in their living quarters. They wanted toilets at their work sites. They wanted Campbell's to stop spraying pesticides while they were actively working in the fields. But what did Campbell do about their demands? They went silent. When Campbell's failed to respond, more than 2,000 workers decided to strike. Campbell would claim it bore no responsibility for the conditions these workers faced, arguing that they were employed by independent contractors, not by Campbell's directly. It was a legal technicality that allowed the company to wash its hands of the people who literally harvested the vegetables that went into its soups. The next year, in 1979, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee escalated their protests. They called for a nationwide boycott of Campbell's products. For years, the boycott continued, with workers and their supporters refusing to buy Campbell's soups. Churches, unions, and community organizations across the country joined the cause. The red and white cans that once symbolized comfort now represented exploitation. Then, in 1983, the FLOC organized something remarkable. Workers and community members gathered for a march that would stretch from Toledo, Ohio, all the way to Campbell's headquarters in Camden, New Jersey, a journey of over 560 miles. Surprisingly, Campbell's held on for 8 years. Finally, in 1986, Campbell signed a contract recognizing the Agricultural Workers Union. They agreed to provide minimum wage and benefits to farm workers. Just a couple of years after finally settling with farm workers, Campbell's found itself in hot water again, this time for misleading consumers about health.
The news is out. A diet high in fiber and low in fat may help reduce the risk of some kinds of cancer. And a lot of people have found that a good source of fiber is Campbell's bean and pea soups.
In 1987, Campbell's released an advertising campaign showing the fiber content of its bean and pea soups. In its marketing, Campbell's mentioned the National Cancer Institute and suggested that eating a high-fiber diet could help reduce the risk of cancer. There's just one problem. The National Cancer Institute hadn't approved this messaging. While the soups did contain fiber, they also contained alarming amounts of salt, so much that no one in their right mind would want to associate themselves with it. Campbell's response was telling. They said that those looking to reduce cancer risk, particularly colon cancer, wouldn't necessarily be worried about sodium. At the time, in 1987, the National Academy of Sciences recommended adults consume no more than 3,300 milligrams of sodium per day. Campbell's argued that a serving of the soups in question fit within federal sodium guidelines. But there was a catch that Campbell's conveniently glossed over. Each can contained up to 3 servings of soup, and many people would eat the entire can in one sitting. That meant a single meal could deliver a massive sodium load, far exceeding what health experts recommended. Ultimately, Campbell's removed any mention of the National Cancer Institute in their ads, but the damage to the company's credibility had already been done. 2 years later, in 1989, the controversies continued. Campbell's Soup again was accused of misleading consumers through false advertising.
These days, all kinds of fad diets are gaining popularity as more Americans try to lose weight. There are diets that are short on meat, diets that are low on protein. Some cut out almost everything but fruits and vegetables, and some even ask you to fast. But the best way to lose weight isn't with some gimmicky diet. It's by controlling your appetite, by exercising, and by eating a balanced diet with foods from the 4 basic groups: poultry, meat, or fish for protein, vegetables and fruit for vitamins and minerals, breads and cereals for carbohydrates, and milk and cheeses for calcium. Any diet that doesn't include all of these important groups can do you more harm than good. So if you're considering a diet or are now on one, remember, there's no diet that can compare with a balanced diet. This food for thought was brought to you by Campbell Soup Company. We make all of these products, and we make sure every one of them is as good for you as it is good tasty. Campbell, we'd like to help more Americans eat right.
The ads in question implied that eating some of Campbell's soups boasted nutritional benefits, including reducing one's risk of certain types of heart disease. Again, they had an aggressive amount of sodium, which was bad for the heart. In response, Campbell stopped running the accused ads. However, the company also claimed that they were innocent. A spokesperson said the sodium content of each soup was listed right on the can, essentially implying that it was up to the consumers to check whether a soup was legitimately heart healthy. It was a blame the victim approach that would become a pattern for Campbell's, which was provide misleading marketing, then point to the fine print when called out. But Campbell's wasn't done with deceptive health marketing. In 2010, a news investigation found that some cans of Campbell's soup were marketed as low sodium, but when compared to the regular versions, the sodium content was the same. Additionally, some of the soups advertised as low fat actually had more grams of fat than their standard equivalents. These supposedly healthier soups were being sold at a higher price, meaning consumers were paying a premium for products that were no healthier than the cheaper alternatives. When Campbell's was asked about the issue, the brand offered another technicality. The packaging wasn't comparing the low-sodium tomato soup to the regular tomato soup, they explained. Instead, the low-sodium tomato soup was lower in sodium on average than all varieties of Campbell's condensed soups.
Trying to be good to your heart? So is Campbell's Healthy Request Soup. Low in fat and cholesterol, heart-healthy levels of sodium, and taste you'll love.
The bigger blow came in 2013. For years, Campbell's had been paying to put the American Heart Association's Trusted Heart Check logo on certain soup cans, implying they met cardiovascular health standards. When people saw that red heart, they naturally assumed those soups were good for the heart. In reality, those Healthy Request soups, again, contain about 410 milligrams of sodium per serving and over 1,000 milligrams per can, triggering a class action lawsuit that accused both Campbell's and the American Heart Association of misleading consumers. The case also revealed that the AHA was receiving about $2.7 million annually from food companies for certifications, raising conflict of interest concerns. But Campbell's again defended itself by pointing to its nutrition labels that the sodium content was clearly listed there. Then, around 2009, Campbell's was engaged in what some called a soup war with its main competitor, Progresso.
Clam chowder?
Yeah.
Me too. What was that look for?
Well, my clam chowder's Campbell Select ready to serve.
And mine's Progresso, so...
So, Campbell Select starts with real clam broth. And it has more tender clams than yours.
Here we go.
And in taste tests across the country,
Go on.
Campbell Select beat Progresso 2-1. Want to taste the winner?
Campbell's had launched a full-scale advertising campaign directly attacking Progresso. The ads featured people eating both brand soups, then claiming that Campbell's products contain fresh ingredients, while Progresso's soups contained MSG. Progresso fired back, pointing out that Campbell's soups contained MSG, while theirs was made with tender, loving care.
When it comes to soup, things are really starting to boil. The country's two most popular brands, Campbell's and Progresso, are publicly bickering over their recipes. This ad is part of what started it. In it, Campbell's boasts that it's made only with TLC, or tender loving care, while Progresso is made with MSG.
After years of criticism about high salt content and multiple scandals related to misleading health claims, Campbell's finally seemed ready to do the right thing.
I don't know.
What's missing in these new special request soups from Campbell's?
I don't know. Want again?
I don't know.
About a third of the salt.
Around 2010, the company launched the heralded line of low-sodium Select Harvest soups, cutting salt by up to 45% in some recipes. It appeared to be a genuine effort to provide healthier options for their consumers. But there was a problem. The healthier formula wasn't selling. Some consumers found the reduced sodium soups bland. Sales figures were disappointing. The low-sodium line was underperforming, and Campbell's executives were growing concerned. In 2011, under new CEO Denise Morrison, Campbell's made a decision that would define the company's priorities for years to come. They did the unthinkable. They added salt back into the soup.
How fast he's growing. Such a big boy, all at once.
Then in 2021, a U.S. congressional report dropped the bombshell. The report found that some baby foods, including products made by Campbell's subsidiary Plum Organics, could contain dangerously high levels of heavy metals. We're talking about toxic heavy metals: lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. But the scandal went beyond just the presence of contaminants. The congressional report noted something even more troubling. Campbell's wasn't exactly cooperating with the federal investigation into baby food. While other companies provided documentation and answered questions, Campbell's response was described as insufficient and evasive. When the report became public, Campbell's issued a statement expressing surprise that the government had accused it of not fully cooperating. The company claimed they've always been willing to work with investigators and provide necessary information, but the congressional report's explicit criticism suggested otherwise. Campbell's also attempted to shift responsibility, implying that the FDA needed to establish better regulations for heavy metals in baby food. The message seemed to be, don't blame us for putting heavy metals in baby food. Blame the government for not regulating us more strictly. The deception even extended to national identity. During a 2024 trade dispute, an Ontario politician accused Campbell's of putting Canadian flags on cans that were actually produced in New Jersey. It was an attempt to capitalize on buy local sentiment during trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada.
And buy Canadian when you can. Anything possible. And I got to call one company out that I learned when I was, just 2 days ago, I met with all these tin can users and their food products. You know, is a company called Campbell Soup. They told me that Campbell Soup's putting a Canadian flag on their cans. They closed their plants here. They moved everything down to the U.S.
Campbell's claimed the branding said designed in Canada, not made in Canada, and that label was removed in 2024 anyway. In 2024, Campbell's faced yet another lawsuit over deceptive labeling. This time, the issue was its V8 Splash beverages. The allegation was that Campbell's had duped consumers into thinking the drinks were naturally flavored by fruit juice. The prominent fruit imagery on the bottles, the Splash branding, everything about the marketing suggested natural fruit flavor. In reality, the tart flavor in V8 Splash wasn't coming from fruit at all. It was coming from artificial D-L-matic acid, a synthetic compound derived from petrochemicals like benzene or butane. Unlike natural malic acid found in apples and other fruits, the DL version is synthesized in a laboratory to mimic tartness at a fraction of the cost. Campbell's was essentially marketing a petrochemical product as a juice drink. The fruit on the label was decorative, not descriptive. The labeling controversies, from the marbles in the 1960s to petrochemical fruit drinks in 2024, all tell the same story. Campbell's has consistently chosen to mislead rather than be transparent. The company has hidden behind technicalities, claimed its deceptions were harmless, and only changed when forced by regulators or public pressure. It's a pattern that defines the brand as much as that red and white can. It is a pattern that would reach its ultimate expression in a leaked recording that finally said what Campbell's had been communicating through its actions for decades.
We are following a messy situation for the Campbell Soup Company today after a former employee filed a lawsuit against the company and then released audio his lawyers say he recorded during a meeting with executives.
In the fall of 2024, two men sat across from each other at a restaurant. One was Martin Bally, vice president in Campbell's IT department. The other was Robert Garza, a junior cybersecurity analyst who worked under Bally. Garza sensed something was off about the meeting. Under the table, he pressed record on his phone. What Garza captured over the next hour would become national news, a viral sensation, and the most damaging scandal in Campbell's 156-year history. Martin Bally unleashed the profanity-laced rant about the very soup his company sold. But Bally wasn't finished. He went on a racist tangent, disparaging Indian employees with expletives. He went on to say, "Fucking Indians don't know a fucking thing, like they couldn't think for their fucking selves." Gotta admit, this seems eerily similar to when Papa John said this.
What bothers me is Colonel Sanders called blacks. I'm like, I've never used that word. And they get away with it.
However, this exec just kept on boasting. He talked about coming to work high on marijuana edibles. This recording was a vile, unvarnished portrait of a Campbell's executive, someone who held real power in the organization, who made decisions that affected products and people. Here was someone who depended on customers for his comfortable salary, openly mocking those same customers. Garza initially kept the recording private. Then in January 2025, Garza reported Bally's conduct to his supervisor, filing a complaint that Bally had created a hostile work environment. Campbell's then fired Garza barely nearly 20 days later. That was the wrong move, and it would prove spectacularly disastrous for Campbell's, because Garza didn't go quietly. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, and as part of that lawsuit, he publicly released the audio recordings in late 2025. Suddenly, the whole world could hear exactly how a Campbell's executive talked about the company's food and consumers when he thought only an underling was listening. In November 2025, as the outrage swelled, Campbell's finally acted. The company placed Bali on leave and later confirmed he was no longer with the company. A spokesperson called the remarks unacceptable and insisted they do not reflect our values and culture. But it was too late. The damage was done, because everyone could see that Campbell's had only acted after the recording went public. When the misconduct was reported internally, the company had protected the executive and fired the whistleblower. Only when facing a PR disaster did Campbell's finally remove Bali. Campbell's also issued denials about the bioengineered meat claim. The company stressed that its soups use 100% real chicken from USDA-approved suppliers, with no artificial or lab-grown meat. But the public wasn't easily convinced. Anyone could turn a Campbell's can around and read the ingredient list. Terms like modified food starch, soy protein isolate, disodium inosinate, and disodium guanylate aren't exactly reassuring. These are laboratory-created additives, not ingredients from anyone's kitchen. Moreover, Campbell's own labels state contains bioengineered food ingredients in their fine print. The leaked recording might have never surfaced if not for one decision. Campbell's chose to fire the messenger instead of disciplining the offender. That choice revealed more about the company than any PR statement ever could. Garza in his lawsuit would allege that he was fired in retaliation and the company had a racially hostile work environment. He claims toxic attitudes came from the top and were tolerated until exposed. This is shoot the messenger culture. It is consistent with anonymous insider accounts of what working at Campbell's is really like. On Glassdoor, where employees and former employees can anonymously review companies, Campbell's corporate culture receives damning assessments. One self-identified former manager described Campbell's as extremely toxic, like Game of Thrones set in a corporate environment, claiming a former sales president ruled by fear. Another reviewer bluntly stated, "If you're unethical or stupid, they will likely promote you," then went on to claim that they had an extreme lack of business ethics. This case seemed eerily similar to the Papa John's case. Now, on its own, the leaked recording and the retaliation lawsuit painted a picture of a company with a deeply troubled internal culture. But in truth, the recording was a symptom, because while the public was focused on the phone call, the lawsuit, and the toxic corporate culture described by insiders, something else had been happening quietly, far from the boardroom and PR statements. And this time, the damage wasn't just to employee morale or corporate reputation. It was flowing straight into a river. In 2025, as Campbell's was still reeling from multiple scandals and strategic failures, another bombshell dropped, one that perfectly symbolized what the company had become.
Campbell's Soup is admitting to thousands of Clean Water Act violations at its Napoleon plant.
Campbell's admitted to over 5,400 days of Clean Water Act violations at its Napoleon, Ohio plant. Let me say that number again, 5,400 days. That's not a few isolated incidents. That's not an occasional slip-up. That's nearly 15 years of consistent, ongoing environmental violations. Between 2018 and 2024, the plant had been systematically polluting the Maumee River, which flows from Fort Wayne, Indiana, through multiple Ohio counties before emptying into Lake Erie near Toledo. What was the company dumping into the river? Phosphorus, ammonia, oil, and grease. And perhaps most alarmingly, E. coli bacteria, a dangerous pathogen that can cause serious illness in humans and animals. The Maumee River is a major tributary to Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes that provides drinking water to millions of people. Lake Erie had already been struggling with pollution issues, particularly algal blooms caused by excess phosphorus. In 2024, 3 environmental agencies, Environment Ohio, Lake Erie Waterkeeper, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency filed a joint lawsuit against Campbell's. Facing such overwhelming evidence, Campbell's couldn't deny what had happened. A year after the lawsuit was filed, the company admitted that the Napoleon facility had indeed violated the Clean Water Act. But even in its admission, Campbell's tried to downplay the severity. The company released a statement claiming that these violations didn't have all that much of a negative impact on the Maumee River. It was an audacious claim. 5,400 days of dumping pollutants somehow had a minimal impact. At that point, the metaphor practically wrote itself. Toxicity in the water, toxicity in the boardroom. Because the problems at Campbell's wasn't limited to its environmental lawsuits. The same pattern of poor judgment, slow accountability, and public embarrassment was already playing out inside the executive suite. In 2018, Campbell's had to quickly oust a newly hired executive, Kelly Johnston, who held the position of vice president. Johnston's tenure lasted only days after he posted conspiracy theories on Twitter. The tweets claimed that George Soros, the financier and philanthropist, and his Open Society foundations were ferrying migrant caravans into the U.S. and providing migrants with immigration lawyers. The controversy pulled Campbell's into a political firestorm the company desperately wanted to avoid. Campbell's quickly released a statement saying that Johnston's views did not reflect the company and that he would be removed from from his position. Within days, Johnston was out. Meanwhile, Campbell's was struggling with broader leadership challenges. Former CEO Denise Morrison had attempted to modernize the company's portfolio by acquiring healthy brands like Bolthouse Farms and Pacific Foods. It was an ambitious strategy designed to help Campbell's appeal to health-conscious millennials and younger consumers who are increasingly avoiding processed foods. But when those acquisitions didn't immediately pay off and Campbell's sales continued to disappoint, Morrison resigned abruptly in 2018. Her sudden departure left the company in turmoil. Interim CEO Keith McLaughlin took over, and in his assessment of the situation, he admitted something that should have been obvious to anyone watching. The company had lost focus. That was putting it mildly. Campbell's had been lurching from crisis to crisis, making acquisitions it couldn't successfully integrate, launching health initiatives it would later abandon, and bleeding both market share and consumer trust. The company that had once been a model of American business stability was now experiencing leadership turnover and strategic confusion. The revolving door at the top bred anxiety throughout the organization. When executives come and go rapidly, when strategies shift with each new leader, when there's no consistent vision, cynicism takes root among employees. People stop believing in the company's mission. They start wondering if anyone at the top actually cares about making good soup or if it's all just about quarterly earnings reports and stock prices. This internal cynicism would soon find its most public and damaging expression yet. But before we get to that, we need to understand another force that was shaping Campbell's decisions: Wall Street. By 2018, Campbell's struggles had attracted the attention of Dan Loeb, a billionaire hedge fund manager. His fund, Third Point LLC, saw Campbell's as either an undervalued prize with hidden potential, or as cynics might say, a wounded prey ripe for a carve-up. Loeb launched a proxy fight to replace Campbell's entire board of directors. He publicly lambasted the existing board, which included descendants of the Dorrance family, who still controlled roughly 40% of the company's shares, as responsible for the lagging share price and a misguided acquisition spree that had piled on debt. The board, Loeb alleged, had presided over years of poor strategy and failed to hold management accountable for the company's decline. Loeb even suggested that Campbell's might be better off broken up entirely, with the soup business sold off separately. To him, Campbell's was a value trap, a company that looked cheap on paper but was fundamentally broken due to its refusal to modernize and adapt. A truce was eventually struck in late 2018. Campbell's avoided a complete board purge by agreeing to add 2 directors picked by Third Point and consulting with Loeb on selecting a new CEO. Loeb declared he would work collaboratively to improve shareholder value, but the underlying problems remained. The activist pressure pushed Campbell's management into an even more aggressive short-term profit mindset. They started cost-cutting and pumping up their stock prices. One major outcome was the decision to shed the fresh foods business, including selling off Bolthouse Farms at a significant loss. It was in this environment, leadership chaos, activist investor pressure, cynicism about corporate values, and relentless focus on cutting costs, that it became clear that Campbell's was in decline. In September 2012, the company announced it would shutter its Sacramento plant. The trend continued. In January 2018, Campbell's announced the closure of its 87-year-old Toronto plant, the last Campbell soup factory in Canada. 380 more workers lost their jobs. Production was shifted to U.S. factories in North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas, all in the name of increasing efficiency. A NASDAQ analysis cheered the Toronto closure explicitly as a move to boost cost savings. For financial analysts, it was good news. Lower costs, better margins, more value for shareholders. For the laid-off employees and Canadian families who had been part of the Campbell story for generations, it felt like abandonment. The plant closures were part of Campbell's broader retreat from any kind of forward-thinking strategy. And through all this chaos, one thing remained constant. Shareholders came first. Costs had to be cut. Quarterly earnings had to be maintained. Everything else, product quality, worker welfare, innovation, and long-term vision, was secondary. In its latest quarterly results, the company reported net sales falling 3% to $2.7 billion. Even after stripping out divestitures, organic sales were still down, driven largely by lower volume. Basically, no one was buying. At the same time, gross profit dropped from $867 million to $792 million. In other words, even as the company continued cutting, consolidating, and squeezing efficiencies out of its operations, the core business was still weakening. Earlier this year, Campbell's announced the closure of its snacks plant in Hyannis, Massachusetts. 49 workers were affected. The facility produced Cape Cod and Kettle brand potato chips, but management concluded the site no longer makes economic sense. And honestly, you could say the same thing about the company's reputation. After decades of forced ad campaigns, plant closures, shrinking quality, and one executive caught on tape calling the product shit for poor people, you have to wonder, who's still buying this stuff?